guys. I've told you a lot about my mom in my videos. You know, this lady back here. And I wanted to make a video talking about my dad. My dad was born on Easter Sunday, April 9th, 1944, thus making him 79 years old in April of this year had he lived. My father was a more talented man than he would ever admit. He left school in the 9th grade, but was still quite intelligent. He was a human calculator. Before we were so rudely interrupted by the battery. My dad, as I was saying, was a human calculator. His math skills were unbelievable. English was not his strong suit as far as school subject matter goes, like parts of speech and stuff. And he would tell you that. My father used to say he was a jack of all trades, master of none. Well, that's not entirely true, because my father was a great painter. One of his jobs. When my parents first met, my father was a steeplejack. For those who don't know what that is, it's someone who climbs big water towers and paints them. Well, my father did that. He climbed big water towers and he painted them, and he traveled all over the country doing it, mostly up and down the East Coast, I think. But once he got married and had a very sick baby, he decided that he needed to get a job closer to home where he would be home in the evenings. And so he got his job at the mill. Which we've talked about. My father also did house painting. He did house painting when he was young. He also did house painting on the side when I was a kid to make extra money. And he was very good at that as well. Interestingly, up on the water towers, they were painted with very heavy, very thick, lead-based paint. Think about that for a second. Thick, heavy, lead-based paint. These were water towers. You'd never get away with that today, because lead-based paints have been outlawed in the United States. So his job would have changed drastically had he stayed. But it was a traveling job. So he would be in Miami, and he would be in Maine, and he would be wherever. And that's what he did. He also painted houses, inside and out, and was excellent at it. In fact, our landlord here hired him to do some painting. Then, like I said, he got married and he went to work in the mill. He went to work at Schuster's Hayward Schuster's. He worked at another mill for a short period in between, and was like the first person hired back when Guilford of Maine took over. Probably a year after. In fact, my father worked as a janitor at my school just to sort of keep some sort of income coming in, you know, during those lean times. And my parents never let on to me how lean those times were. I understand it now as an adult, but I certainly didn't understand it then because my parents never let on. We had different times throughout our lifetime as a family, where things were better financially and things were leaner financially. And it's, until I was an adult, it wasn't something I was privy to because I shouldn't have been. I was a child. And my parents tried to make my life not change. You know what I mean? Depending on how lean the times were. I always had food. I always had clothes. I always had shoes. I always had toys of some sort. Pretty much always had a bicycle. Even if one of them did come off the dump, it worked just fine. My parents put the training wheels on, and it worked just fine. And that was a common thing back then. People would, when they went to the dump, would look around and say, oh, that bicycle's still in good shape. And take it, either give it to a friend for their kid or take it for their kid. Clean it up a little bit, put on the training wheels, and you get a bike. People don't really do that today anymore. Or they would find some antique piece of furniture that someone threw out and they would take it home and fix it up and use it, So that's just what they did back then. My favorite bike I had forever. A lot of my bikes, for some reason, I didn't have very long. But the bike that I had forever had a banana seat. And that thing was the most comfortable ride. And it had the handlebars. I'm trying to make sure I'm on screen here. Came across like this and down, like a U, like the two handlebars, okay? And then it came down and it was a U shape. I loved that stupid bike. I remember when they finally made me throw it away because it was rusted. It was rusted through. And it was getting dangerous. And they wanted me to ride a 10-speed. I couldn't even reach the freaking pedals. I did learn to ride a 3-speed. But I couldn't reach the pedals on a 10-speed. I wanted my doggone bike. But anyway. Back to my dad. I remember when I was a kid, Mom would go to bingo, or sometimes she worked in the evenings, and Dad would take a nap because he worked very, very hard, and be like 12-hour days. And my dad was getting older, Figure he was already in his 40s. Because you figure he was 30 when I was born. So if I'm 10 years old, he's already 40. Which is hard for me to imagine. When I graduated from high school, just shy of 19. He was almost 50 years old. Well, he was the age I would be this year, 49. I will be 49 this year. And I don't feel old, but I don't feel the same as I did when I was 20. I can't say 25 because I feel better than I did at 25 because I don't have stage 4 cancer. That was not fun. But my dad worked really hard and sometimes worked 12-hour days plus half days on Saturdays. And so he would take a nap. He would give me a few ones to go to the video store and to Harry's to get a chocolate milk. And I would go. Harry's is the local pizza parlor. There's like 3 of them now. 3 Harry's in 3 different towns. And I would go get videos. I would sit and watch them. He would sleep on the couch. Or I would play outside until after dark if it was summertime and come in, get my bath. So with my dad, when I was alone with my dad, there wasn't a lot of, you would think because my dad was fairly protective of me that there would have been like Superman eyes supervision of me, but he knew I was safe. You know what I mean? He knew I was safe in the neighborhood. So I think my mother probably kept a better eye on me playing outside and stuff than my dad did. That being said, even though when my dad got mad at me, sometimes it got a little physical, I actually preferred him to get mad at me to my mother because he got over it quicker. My mother was the type of person that took a long time to get over being upset. My father wasn't. He was quick to anger. She took longer to anger. He was quick to anger, but quick to get over it. She was slower to anger and slower to get over it. I think I'm somewhere in between. Definitely takes me a while to get over it, but I don't get angry quite as quickly as my dad did. But it doesn't take me quite as long as my mom, if that makes sense. Anyway, like I said, my dad worked at the mill. He worked there forever. Up until we moved here, actually. We were going to buy the house that we were living in, and he lost his job because they moved the company to North Carolina. Now, they offered him a job in North Carolina. The problem was that they were going to cut his pay to send him to North Carolina. What you talking about, Willis? I mean, seriously. You're going to send us, 7 states away for less money? I don't friggin' think so. You know, I mean, he earned what he was making. He was probably one of the top paid guys on his shift, in all actuality. He worked first shift. That was his preference. Some people have the preference of different shifts. Some people like swing. Some people like second. Some people like third. He preferred his first shift. My mother, on the other hand, liked to work nights. So it actually worked out quite nicely for them because there was always someone with me. And I didn't have to pay someone to be with me. because they worked opposite hours. Or I was in school and they worked the same hours. So, my father worked, as I mentioned in other videos, in the dye house / warehouse. Basically, he would bring in, unload and load trucks. He did inventory, which always meant tons of overtime. My dad was actually the supervisor of dye house warehouse. Then there was a foreman over him. He never wanted the foreman's job because he never wanted to wear a shirt and tie. That just wasn't his thing. He had a hard enough time with the supervisor job. But he earned that job. And the men that worked under him said, "We will all quit if you do not promote Willie to be our boss." So they had Barry. You've heard me talk of him and his family, and his daughter is in the hospital right now. Cousin David, a couple of other guys too that were there that knew Dad forever and said, "No, he needs to be our boss. And if you don't do it, we're all walking out." Company knew they were serious. So they promoted my dad. He did get a raise in pay. First time he went for the promotion, he didn't get it. So the second time, when the guy stood up for him, he got it. And that remained his title, and of course, his pay. Even after all those guys were eventually laid off. And he was in the dye house warehouse by himself. I think at one time he may have had a guy or two under him, but for the most part he was on his own. He even had his own little desk. Sort of an office, which is kind of neat. I was talking to my mother about this. I didn't realize Dad had a desk. She said, "Yeah, he had a small office. What do you think he did his paperwork for the trucks and his, inventory paperwork and all of that at his desk?" So, and that's true. I was a kid. What did I know? My father was a laborer, So, but this was much later my mother said that to me. She said, "Where did you think he did his paperwork?" Dirt, But that's pretty cool to me. And at school they used to say, you don't want to work in the mill, and you want to have a corporate job or something, or some other fancy job, But I was proud of my father. My father knew about fabrics and jacquard and all the different styles of fabrics and prints and stuff. He understood making the dyes and dyeing the wool and drying the wool and opening the bales and loading the truck and unloading the truck and inventorying everything that they had and all the safety protocols. My father was certified for first aid and CPR. My father had a license for many years to drive a forklift or a fork truck. which is what he called it. He never called it a forklift. He called it a fork truck. He did hit a water pipe one day on his forklift, on his fork truck. He backed into it, made a very big mess in the warehouse. That got him some overtime, unintentional overtime, because he called home and said, I'm going to be late, dear. Can you keep my supper warm? I made a mess. He said, I couldn't believe it when I backed up and the pipe was right there and it just burst, spewing water all over the warehouse. That was pretty funny. They had bales way up high because remember, a fork truck can go up, way up above itself to put something on a shelf. Well, they had a bale way up high one time. And I started to tell you this story in another video, and I realized I did not finish the story. And I came home that day, oops, and my father was on crutches. I'm like, what's going on here? And, well, it turns out the bale fell on his foot. It looked nasty, but it wasn't broken. They sent him to the hospital and all that. He was out of work for a few weeks. I think he might have gotten a little bit of workman's comp for it, because he was out for a few weeks, a couple of weeks. But as soon as he could walk on it at all and bear weight, he was back to work because I was dead. The only other work injury that I can think of that he had was the acid burns. There are acids and chemicals that get mixed with the dyes. And he had a barrel, a container, and I think he was putting it away or preparing to use it. I'm not sure which. And as he rolled it forward, the bung, which is the part that goes in the bung hole, shot out, shooting acid into his face. Literally ate the color off his glasses, burned the hell out of his eye, his cheek, all around his eye. And fortunately, his vision was not affected because my father knew exactly what to do. And I remember him saying, later on at home as he was relaying the story, he said, I couldn't get to an eye wash station from where I was, but I remembered that we had an emergency shower right around the corner. He said, so I ran to the emergency shower and pulled the handle. Then I went to see the nurse. And she got me set up the eye wash. She drove him to the hospital. And I remember when he came home that day, because nobody called us to tell us he was at the hospital, that he'd been injured. He got out of his vehicle, and I was upstairs in my bedroom, and I looked down, I'm like, those are not my dad's clothes. They're 9 miles too big. What is going on? And I ran downstairs, and he came in, and he was just burnt, red, on his cheek, around his eye. It was horrible. His glasses were just stripped of color. His glasses probably actually saved his vision. So the mill ended up sending him to the eye doctor a number of times. They paid for new glasses, which of course had to be safety glass. Um, which they paid for more than once. Once they decided he needed safety glass, they started paying for his glasses. So they also would give him an allowance for his boots every year. It was either $50 or $75 for his steel-toe boots every year. And we would go to a place called the Little Red Shoe House. Anybody remember that place? Here in Massachusetts. I want to say it was in Mendon, Milford. It was in that area. Mendon, Hopedale, Milford, that area. But yeah, the Little Red Shoe House. That's where I got my shoes too. My dad would get his steel-toed boots there. Later on, he would get them at Walmart, but back in the day, he would get them there because they accepted his certificate from work. And later on, he would get them at Walmart because he would usually get Brahma brand, and he would get reimbursed later rather than get a certificate, which is what he got in the early days. So that's what you would do. You got the certificate, you would work. Obviously, you would go to the place that was going to accept the certificate. And I have daddyisms, things that my dad would say that were just his way of talking. If I would be wearing something and say, "Don't I look cute, Daddy?" or or do something, twirl or something, and my father would say, "Pure sex, Ange." It was an expression. It didn't mean anything like that. It was an expression that he used. When it was really cold out, he would say it was. Sorry, guys. Colder than a witch's hoo-hoo. I'm trying to think of some of his other Willie-isms. Well, you'll hear me say some of them because like it's a whatever thing. You'll hear me say that. That's a dad, That's a daddyism. He used to say, he would call the refrigerator the icebox. He'd call your hat a cloak. He would both of my parents called pants slacks. Both of my parents called a shirt a blouse. I think a blouse technically is a button down, but a woman's button down is technically what a blouse is. But trying to think, my father had a name. Oh, he never called a bathrobe a bathrobe. It was a house coat. And he never said put something on your feet. He always said put something in your feet. I'm looking at him over the top of you over there, and I'm just trying to think of other things he used to say. He was so funny. um, I am a complete and utter klutz, in case you haven't noticed that. My father would say, "Very good, Clyde. Nice going, Charlie." Or he would say, or he would call me Grace when I was being my least graceful. Um, he called me Butterball, but Punky was his nickname for me, which is why this channel is named Punky's World. My mother called me Gigi. Um, and I thought that that was a later thing, but thinking about it, she called me Gigi when I was little too. Um, so this could be either one, you know. My dad was the loudest person at my graduation. And I remember trying to get out of my cap and gown because they wouldn't give you the certificate itself, the actual diploma, until you returned the cap and gown. You got to keep the tassel, of course. Um, and so I was, oh no, we tried to return it. I was taking it off faster than a stripper. And they put the thing in the folder for me, the diploma. And I ran outside and I gave that to my daddy. "You never got this. I got this for you." You know, because it's not something he ever had. And it ticks me off. Or did tick me off. I don't talk to her anymore. When my aunt would, well, when I was up in Maine staying with her, she would say things about my dad, about him not buying a house and him not doing this, that, and the other thing. And he could have, I don't know, done this, that, or the other thing. And he could have finished school and he could have gone back to school. And when could he have done that? In the 12-hour days he was working, plus half days on Saturdays at the mill, to make sure I had a roof over my head, food in my belly, and clothes on my back, shoes on my feet. When exactly was this man supposed to have time to do that? You know? He sacrificed for me and for my mother. My mother did go back to school. She got certificates in accounting 1 and 2 on top of part of her business schooling from her first time in college. My mother was well educated. And my aunt didn't like to admit that either, because my mother technically didn't finish college the first time. Well, that was because she didn't have a place to live. She couldn't stay in the dorm. The money stopped coming for the dorm. She couldn't help that. She came down here to stay with her aunt. She met my dad and never left. Plus the fact that there was no snow on the ground down here in February, and she was amazed. As for right now, there is some snow on the ground. Not a lot, but there is snow on the ground. It took long enough. It's January 25th. And there is finally snow on the ground. We had snow on the ground one other time. I think it was at the end of last year. And my dad was protective of me in some ways. Like, I brought home, well, I didn't bring it home. My dad took me to get Dirty Dancing because every other kid had seen it and I wanted to see it. We had moved to Northbridge. It was 87. I was about 13. And he walked into that room. He pointed at that TV. He said, "You get that off my TV right now. You get that out of that VCR right now." Okay, Dad. I never want to see that in my house again. Okay, Dad. You took me to rent it about an hour and a half ago. What happened? Well, it was a little too racy for him. For me. So I had to rewind it, get it out. We immediately brought it back. My mother said, when your father told me about that, she said, I was just laughing and I said to him, "Willie, who rented it for her?" You know? She told me this much later as an adult, but it's funny. So my friend owned a copy of it, and I had told him the story. I said, "I'm not bringing that home." And my parents were both laughing. They're like, "Well, you're an adult now." Yeah, but I don't care about it, truthfully. I wanted to see it because everybody said how hot Patrick Swayze was, and truthfully, I didn't think he was. He was pretty hot in Ghost. But yeah, it was. And you guys let me watch Last American Virgin. If you've ever seen that movie, let me know in the comments because it was a riot. It was hilarious. And the soundtrack was REO Speedwagon. Out of this world soundtrack. So if you've seen it, let me know. Because, yes, it was a little raunchy, but it was hilarious. And like I said, soundtrack was REO Speedwagon. Phenomenal. And I think Oingo Boingo was in the soundtrack. I'm trying to remember. There were a few good songs from, I believe it came out in 80 or 81. Good songs from that era, you know. So, and I highly recommend it, by the way. Definitely one if you're older. If you're my age or older, you know about. And you've probably seen. It's funny. My dad had different sides to him, like we all do, and he could be nasty at times. He could be at times so thoughtful and so selfless, and sometimes he could be so thoughtless, and I think we're all that way, you know. Um, Even though um, there may have been issues at times, I love him. And Mom and I had issues too. We fought, yelled, and screamed like the best of them. But I loved her too. I do believe my parents were strict, but I do believe, for the most part, they were fair. I learned the word reprieve very young. Because if my father gave me a punishment, like I needed to go to bed early for a week, I knew that if I behaved myself for 2.5, 3 days, I would get a reprieve and my punishment would be over. That didn't happen with my mother. My mother did not believe in reprieves. My father, however, did. It was probably came from my grandmother. My grandfather, on the other hand, had his demons, we'll say, and he was extremely abusive to his children. I'm not 100% certain whether he was abusive to my grandmother. I think he was. My grandfather didn't work very steadily. So my father left school, as I said, went to work in 1960. My father worked before that, though, because he was a paper boy. And he took care of his mom. He wanted to take care of his brothers so that they would both graduate. They did not, which ticked him off. He wanted them to have the opportunity to graduate because he was taking care of mom and taking care of the house and, working, and they didn't. And of course, my aunt called BS on that, and she just really pissed me off. It's like, you don't know my father. You have never met my father. What part of my father about literally worked himself to death do you not understand, lady? And you think he should have found time to go to school and buy a house and whatever else? My parents looked at houses on many different occasions. There were a lot of reasons why they chose not to buy a house, at times when they could have. And were finally ready to buy one when my father lost his job the last time at 62 years old. My mother had plans for that house. The very first thing she was going to do was get somebody in to remove the tree that was growing out of one of the chimneys, because that is not good. Yeah, there shouldn't be a tree growing out of your chimney. That was her first thing that she was going to do. I know she had other plans, going forward for heat in the big room, and my aunt pissed me off so badly because I told her, so you don't understand. My father would cry because he couldn't find a job at 62 years old. And she called BS on that and said, my husband would get a job today. I said, nobody wanted to hire him. He was too old, and he had had the same job for too many years. And they said, you're better off having a different job every 3 or 4 years than having the same job all those years. So, what's going on up there? Anyway, and she called BS. She called BS on everything. And it bothers me. And she would say, your mother said she didn't have clothes, and she didn't have... And I said, what part of that was one period of time? Because she sacrificed to make sure that her child had everything her child needed. So she went with 2 pairs of underwear and, 3 pairs of pants and 2 shirts that she was constantly washing, and a bra. She did that for her child. And my father never told us when he needed clothes. We would sneak in his room when he wasn't home, into his bureau drawers, and go through them and see how many pairs of socks without holes he had, how many decent pair of underwear he had, how many decent t-shirts he had that didn't have dye all over them or whatever, how many flannel shirts he had that were still decent, because he wouldn't tell us. Every year at Christmas time we would do that. And we would sometimes do it in the middle of the year too. My dad was a little weird about, like, he didn't express himself well. So sometimes he would hurt my mother's feelings because she would say that she needed to get some clothes. Like I said, when she didn't have a lot, but they had the ability, and he would not want to take her to the store, so he would say no. But it wasn't about the money, you know? Sometimes that was an excuse, but generally it wasn't about the money. It was him not wanting to, and not so much not wanting to take her, but not wanting to go because he was tired. But he didn't know how to express, look, dear, I'm really tired tonight. Can we plan to do this Saturday? He didn't have a good grasp on how to express it. And my mother would just get hurt. She would just get hurt. And if I gotta ask you, I don't need it. You know what I mean? She would frustrate me. It's like, you have to ask for things because I can't read your mind. I don't know what you want and what you need. So, when she was working in the store, he had no problem. She went and got some clothes, and that wasn't an issue. I think it just depended on, when she asked. I don't think, like I said, that those were the things that, like, she asked to go to Indian Ranch, which we did quite often when I was little, and for this particular show, and Dad had said no, and of course she was disappointed, and because she was disappointed and upset, he didn't want her to be upset. He changed his mind. Well, there's no way. I gotta get upset for it. I'm not doing it. And it was like, again, I think a lot of the times my father would say no to something or make an excuse not to do something. Because I think he was just too tired. Or he would not be feeling good and not say it, things like that. So my father never took a day off from work. And I've seen my father sick. Terrible, horrible colds. Went to work every day. And I just feel that it was his lack of being able to express himself. Or expressing himself poorly in some situations that caused disagreements between them, more than anything. But I can tell you a funny story. I was little, and I asked for something or to do something. I don't remember what it was. And he said, we don't have any money to do that. And I pointed up at the cupboard and I said, "Yes, you do. You have all kinds of blue money up there." Checks. um, I just thought of them as blue money. And my parents laughed because it was funny. And they both said, "No, you have to have green money in the bank in order to use that blue money." Ah. So. So that is pretty funny, actually. Oh, excuse me. I'll let you know how that strawberry pie turned out, taste wise. Can't wait to bring a piece to my neighbors, but they're not home right now. Um, because I looked over to see. Um, yeah, Dad was. Oh no, not cloak. He didn't call it a cloak. He called it a toque. Called it had a toque, not a cloak. Trying to think. Um, my dad grew up in Manchog. He grew up around his French family, his mother's family, and he would, in the summers in the 50s, he would go to uh, his aunt and uncles in uh, Connecticut, his father's side of his family. His aunt and his uncle owned a duplex together, and they each lived on each side. His father's sister and her husband lived on one side, and his father's brother and his wife lived on the other side, with their respective families. And my great grandmother lived on one side, my great grandfather lived on the other side, because family lore says they did not like each other. um, I think my great grandfather may have suffered from the same demons that affected my grandfather and that my father beat. So, um, I am, you know, I'm blessed to have the parents that I had. You know, they may not have been perfect. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But they were the parents I needed. Um, I remember when I was a kid, and I still do this. It's become ingrained in me. Wind down time, which is that time before bed when you do a quiet activity. You watch a program, you color, you write, you draw, whatever it is. You sit quietly, do a puzzle, whatever it is, and that helps you get relaxed for bed. My father called it wind down time. Um, my mom taught me all the things, that moms teach their daughters. I still remember when she taught me to shave my legs. I was going back to school for the 8th grade. It was actually Labor Day, and the telethon was ending. I was in the bathtub, and she came in and she showed me how to shave my legs. And to this day, I barely grow peach fuzz under my armpits. One armpit. One armpit doesn't really grow anything. It's so funny. Everybody thinks I'm weird. They just never have. Although women shave their armpits, men typically don't. I wonder how many women, because I've talked to other women who said the same thing. They really don't grow anything. Um, how many women would even have to? Because I think it's more of a male secondary sex characteristic to have hair under your armpits than it is as a female. I don't know how we got there from Dad, but um, yeah, my mom taught me how to cook, and she taught me how to clean, and all of those things. And I am my mother's daughter, so that's why this place stays clean, because I am my mother's daughter, and I think she would be impressed. Um, I don't know about. Well, my dad was always a clean person when I was a kid, and he did dishes and helped with laundry and stuff. Um, he wasn't. He had no problem doing that. It's part of being a family, you know. One of his buddies made a comment about him doing laundry because the guy was a male chauvinist pig, and my father threw him out. And proudly told my mother when she got home from work that when he picked her up from work that he threw him out. She was working evenings, so my father was folding laundry. Big flippin' deal. I think my father later on, when my mother was working evenings consistently, did more laundry than she did. Just because he would come home from work, throw a load in, you know what I mean? He did dishes. I wasn't allowed to do dishes until I was an adult. Seriously. My mother never understood why adults let their children do dishes. Like, why would you do that? They're not going to get them clean. And you're just going to have to go behind them and wash them again when they're not looking. So why would you do that? Even as a teenager, my mother really didn't want me washing dishes because she was a clean freak. But she never had a dish. Well, she did have a dishwasher once. It was a dishwasher that actually hooked up to the sink. It had a little thing on it. You put it on the faucet, and then you pulled this little lever down, and it locked it onto the faucet. And the top of it was a butcher block. So it was called a portable dishwasher. She didn't use it too much. Then it sprung a leak, and it sat in their bedroom forever. So, until they finally got rid of it. Because I remember asking her years later, why didn't you use the dishwasher? And she said, it had a leak. So, but it was on wheels, and she could wheel it up to the sink and hook it up. Same way you would hook up a portable washing machine, which we had one of those too. We've had a couple of those over the years. Um, and we had dryers, of course. I like it better having my own washer and dryer. But then in actuality, in this apartment, it would fit right there in the kitchen where the freezer is and where that stand is. They would fit right there perfectly. Although, where would you vent the dryer? Because that's the closet. That's the hallway where the stairs are. Couldn't really vent it into the hallway. I mean, well, no, because you'd be venting it into the upstairs apartment. Because there isn't really a hallway. It's stairs that lead directly into the upstairs apartment. It's a weird setup. So you really couldn't do that. I'm not sure where you'd vent a dryer. That would be the issue, unless you put the dryer in the bedroom and vented it out. But anyway, Mom pretty much always had a washer and dryer. So Dad tried to make sure she had things, you know. Thank you for joining me for this reminiscing about my dad. Because I've told you all about my mom. And I'm very proud of my dad, too. We have 30% battery. Please click that like button. Please subscribe if you are new. Hit that bell for notifications. Remember, you can customize them. Please share the video. Please comment. It all helps. Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye.